A 29-year-old nurse stared at her phone screen in the hospital break room, her hands trembling as she read the text message from her bank. Account balance, 47.23. 3 months ago, it had been $18,000. Her life savings gone. The man who had promised to love and protect her had taken everything while she risked her life, saving others during the deadliest pandemic in a century. But what she didn't know was that one of her patients had been watching, planning, and preparing to change her life in ways she never could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria Santos pulled her car into the employee parking lot of Desert Valley Medical Center as the Arizona sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the desert air still held a hint of coolness that would vanish within hours. She sat in her aging Honda Civic for a moment, gathering the strength for another 12-hour shift in the COVID intensive care unit. The radio played softly, a morning news report about rising case numbers and overwhelmed hospitals. She turned it off. She lived this reality every day and didn't need reminders. Maria Santos was the kind of person who smiled even when her world was falling apart. At 29, she possessed the rare combination of clinical expertise and genuine compassion that made her patients feel safe during their most vulnerable moments. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a practical bun, and her brown eyes held a warmth that could calm even the most anxious family members. She had chosen nursing not for the money, which was modest, or the recognition, which was rare, but because she believed in the fundamental human duty to care for others when they couldn't care for themselves. The ICU at Desert Valley Medical Center had become her second home over the past 2 years. She knew every beep of every machine, could read the subtle changes in a patient's breathing that might signal improvement or decline, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when someone needed an extra moment of human connection. Her colleagues respected her clinical skills, but they loved her for the way she remembered details about their lives, brought homemade cookies during particularly brutal weeks, and somehow maintained hope, even when the statistics suggested otherwise. But Maria's personal life told a different story. She had married Jake Santos 3 years ago, believing in the promise of building something beautiful together. Jake had been charming in those early days, full of big dreams about starting his own construction company and providing for the family they planned to have. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an easy laugh, and the kind of confidence that made Maria feel protected. They had met at a friend's barbecue, where Jake had spent the entire evening asking her about her work, seeming genuinely fascinated by her dedication to healing others. The first year of marriage had been everything Maria had hoped for. Jake worked steady construction jobs around Phoenix, and they saved money together, talking late into the night about buying a house with a backyard where they could host family gatherings. Maria loved the way Jake would massage her shoulders after particularly difficult shifts, how he would have dinner waiting when she came home exhausted. He seemed to understand the emotional toll of her work and created a refuge for her at home. But construction work in Phoenix was unpredictable, dependent on weather, contracts, and an economy that seemed to shift without warning. When Jake lost his job 18 months ago, Maria had been supportive, encouraging him to take his time finding the right position. She could carry them financially for a while with her nursing salary, and she believed in his ability to bounce back. What she didn't realize was that Jake's self-worth had become tied to his ability to provide, and losing that identity had started a dangerous spiral. The gambling had started small. Jake would mention winning $20 on a scratch-off ticket or having a good night playing poker with friends. Maria hadn't thought much of it initially, Lots of people enjoyed occasional gambling as entertainment, but as the months passed and Jake remained unemployed, the gambling became more frequent and the stakes higher. He started talking about investment, opportunities and sure things that would solve their financial problems quickly. Maria worked extra shifts to compensate for Jake's lost income, often pulling doubles and picking up weekend assignments. She told herself it was temporary, that Jake would find work soon and things would return to normal. She was so focused on keeping her patients alive during the most challenging period in modern healthcare that she didn't notice the signs of Jake's addiction growing stronger. The late nights out with friends, the secretive phone calls, the mood swings that ranged from euphoric excitement to dark depression. Their joint savings account had been Maria's idea, a symbol of their partnership and shared goals. Every month, she would transfer a portion of her paycheck into that account, watching the balance grow slowly but steadily. It represented security, the possibility of a down payment on a house, maybe a family vacation, or simply the peace of mind that came from having a financial cushion. Maria checked the account regularly, taking pride in their discipline and planning for the future. When the COVID pandemic hit Phoenix in full force, Maria's world transformed overnight. The ICU became a war zone where she fought to save lives while risking her own health daily. She worked longer hours, took on additional responsibilities, as colleagues fell ill and witnessed suffering on a scale that tested every aspect of her emotional resilience. The hospital provided basic protective equipment, but there were constant shortages, equipment failures, and the ever-present fear of bringing the virus home to Jake. During this period, Jake seemed supportive on the surface. He would text her encouraging messages during her shifts, prepare simple meals, and express gratitude for her sacrifice. What Maria didn't know was that Jake had discovered online gambling platforms that operated around the clock. While she was intubating COVID patients and holding the hands of dying strangers, Jake was feeding their savings into digital slot machines and sports betting apps, chasing losses with increasingly desperate bets. The account balance had dropped gradually at first. Jake was clever about it, taking amounts that wouldn't immediately trigger Maria's attention. A few $100 here, 1,000 there, always with a story about emergency expenses or temporary loans to friends. When Maria asked about the decreasing balance, Jake explained it away with talk of upcoming job prospects that required small investments or family emergencies that he was handling to protect her from additional stress. Maria wanted to believe him. She was working 14-hour days in emotionally and physically exhausting conditions, watching people die despite her best efforts, and dealing with the constant anxiety of potential exposure to a deadly virus. The last thing she wanted was to add marital conflict to her already overwhelming stress. So she chose trust over suspicion, partnership over vigilance, believing that the man she loved would never deliberately hurt her. But Jake's addiction had progressed beyond his ability to control or conceal. The initial small withdrawals became larger as his losses mounted. He began taking cash advances on credit cards, borrowing against their future, creating a web of debt that required increasingly desperate measures to maintain. The story, he told himself, was that he was one big win away from replacing everything he had taken, one perfect bet away from becoming the provider he had promised to be. On this particular morning, as Maria prepared for another shift in the COVID ward, she had no idea that their savings account was nearly empty. She didn't know that Jake had spent the previous night losing the last of their emergency fund on a basketball game that he had convinced himself was a guaranteed winner. She was thinking about Mrs. Catherine Liu, the elderly COVID patient who had been struggling in the ICU for over a week, and whether today might bring the breakthrough that would allow Catherine to finally be extubated. Maria gathered her things from the car, checked her phone for any last-minute schedule changes, and walked toward the hospital entrance. The sun was beginning to warm the pavement, and she could see the early shift nurses arriving for what would undoubtedly be another challenging day. She had no way of knowing that this would be the day her carefully constructed life would begin to unravel, or that the very patient she was most worried about would become the key to rebuilding everything she thought she had lost. The automatic doors of Desert Valley Medical Center opened with their familiar whoosh, and Maria stepped into the controlled chaos of a hospital operating at maximum capacity. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The scent of disinfectant and the sound of monitors beeping created a soundtrack that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. She badged in at the security desk, exchanged tired smiles with colleagues who were ending their night shifts, and headed toward the elevators that would take her to the COVID ICU on the 7th floor. As the elevator climbed, Maria thought about the conversation she and Jake had planned for that evening. They were supposed to discuss their budget and maybe start planning a small vacation for when the pandemic subsided. She was looking forward to that conversation, to reconnecting with Jake and remembering the dreams they had shared. She had even been thinking about surprising him with a small gift, something to acknowledge how patient he had been during this difficult period when her work demanded so much of her time and energy. The elevator doors opened onto the 7th floor, and Maria stepped into the world where she felt most competent and needed. The ICU was a maze of rooms filled with sophisticated medical equipment, monitors that tracked every vital sign, and patients fighting for their lives. It was also where she had found her calling, where she could use her skills and compassion to make a difference in the most critical moments of human existence. Elena Rodriguez, her best friend and fellow ICU nurse, was waiting with the night shift report. Elena had been Maria's anchor during the most difficult months of the pandemic, the person who could read her mood with a glance and provide exactly the right combination of support and humor to get through another impossible day. They had trained together, celebrated each other's successes, and shared the unique bond that comes from working side by side in life and death situations. "Room 712 is asking for you specifically," Eleanor said, as they walked toward the nurse's station. "Mrs. Liu had a good night, her oxygen levels are improving, and she's been asking about the nurse with the kind eyes who talks to her about her garden." Maria smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came from knowing she had made a connection with a patient. Mrs. Catherine Liu had been in the ICU for 8 days, fighting a severe case of COVID that had left her family terrified and helpless. Catherine was a retired teacher who had spent 40 years shaping young minds in Phoenix's public schools. She had immigrated from Taiwan as a young woman, built a life around education and family, and faced this health crisis with the same quiet determination that had carried her through decades of challenges. "I promised I'd bring her pictures of desert wildflowers," Maria said, pulling out her phone to show Eleanor the photos she had taken during a brief hike the previous weekend. "She told me she missed seeing them bloom in the spring." This was vintage Maria Santos, going beyond medical care to address the emotional and spiritual needs of her patients. She understood that healing involved more than monitoring vital signs and administering medications. Sometimes it required helping patients maintain their connection to the world outside the hospital, reminding them of the beauty and normalcy that waited for their recovery. As Maria began her rounds, checking on each patient and coordinating with doctors about treatment plans, she felt the familiar rhythm of purposeful work. This was where she belonged, where her skills and instincts combined to create something meaningful. The stress and exhaustion of pandemic nursing were real and overwhelming, but they were balanced by moments of genuine human connection and the knowledge that her presence could literally mean the difference between life and death. She had no idea that while she was adjusting Mrs. Liu's oxygen flow and showing her photos of wildflowers, Jake was waking up in their apartment with a crushing hangover and the horrifying realization of what he had done the night before. She didn't know that he was staring at his phone, looking at betting app notifications that confirmed his worst fears about the previous night's losses. She couldn't have imagined that the man she trusted most in the world was, at that very moment, considering whether to confess his betrayal or find some way to hide it just a little longer. Maria Santos began that shift believing in the fundamental goodness of people, the power of healing, and the security of a marriage built on mutual respect and shared dreams. By the end of the day, one of those beliefs would be shattered, but the others would prove stronger than she ever could have imagined. The text message arrived at 2:47 p.m. while Maria was adjusting Mrs. Liu's ventilator settings. Her phone buzzed against her hip, but she ignored it, focused entirely on the delicate process of weaning Catherine off the breathing machine. After 8 days of mechanical ventilation, this was the moment they had all been working toward. The first real sign that Catherine might be strong enough to breathe independently. "That's it, Mrs. Liu," Maria whispered, watching the monitors carefully. "You're doing beautifully. Just let your lungs remember how to do their job." Catherine's eyes fluttered open, still cloudy from medication, but more alert than they had been in days. She tried to speak around the breathing tube, and Maria gently placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Don't try to talk yet. You're getting better. That's what matters. Your son David called this morning, and your daughter Sophie is driving down from Flagstaff. They're so proud of how hard you're fighting." The monitors showed steady improvement in Catherine's oxygen saturation and respiratory rate. Dr. Amanda Foster, the ICU director, appeared in the doorway and nodded approvingly at the readings. Amanda was a woman in her 50s who had seen every possible complication and crisis during her 20-year career, but even she seemed cautiously optimistic about Catherine's progress. "If these numbers hold steady for another 4 hours, we can consider extubation tomorrow morning," Amanda told Maria quietly. "She's lucky to have you advocating for her. That family has been calling every day, desperate for updates." Maria felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from seeing a patient turn the corner. These moments made every exhausting shift worthwhile, every personal sacrifice meaningful. She had chosen nursing because she believed in the possibility of healing, in the human capacity to recover from even the most devastating circumstances. It wasn't until her lunch break at 3:15 that Maria finally checked her phone. The message was from Golden Phoenix Credit Union, their bank's automated alert system. "Account balance below $50. Please contact customer service if you believe this is an error." Maria stared at the screen, certain there had been some mistake. She opened her banking app with trembling fingers, entering her password twice because her hands were shaking. The account balance appeared in stark black numbers, $47. 23. 3 months ago, that account had contained $18,000. Their emergency fund, their down payment savings, their carefully accumulated safety net. Maria scrolled through recent transactions, her heart pounding as she saw withdrawal after withdrawal, each one authorized with Jake's login credentials. Casino ATM withdrawals, online gaming transfers, cash advances that she had never known existed. She sat in the break room staring at her phone screen, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The withdrawals weren't random. They showed a pattern of escalating desperation. Small amounts at first, then larger sums, then everything that remained. The most recent transaction had occurred at 2:30 a.m. the previous night, while she had been sleeping before her early shift. Jake had taken the last $3,000 while she lay in bed, exhausted from another day of fighting to save lives. Elena found her there 20 minutes later, still staring at her phone, with tears streaming down her face. Maria, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maria held up her phone without speaking, showing Elena the bank balance. Elena's eyes widened as she processed what she was seeing. Oh, honey, no. This can't be right. There has to be some explanation. Look at the transaction history, Maria whispered, her voice breaking. It's all him. Every withdrawal, every transfer. Jake has been gambling away our savings while I've been here trying to keep people alive. Elena sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around Maria's shoulders. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the betrayal settling over them like a suffocating blanket. What are you going to do? Elena finally asked. I don't know. I trusted him completely. We were supposed to buy a house, maybe start a family. I've been working extra shifts to help us save money, and he's been throwing it away on casino games. Maria's phone rang, displaying Jake's number. She stared at it for several rings before declining the call. 30 seconds later, it rang. Again. You should answer, Elena said gently. You need to hear what he has to say. Maria answered on the fourth ring, her voice barely steady. Hello, Jake. Hey, babe. How's your shift going? I was thinking maybe we could grab dinner tonight at that little Mexican place you like. The casual normalcy of his tone made Maria feel sick. How could he sound so relaxed, so loving, when he had just stolen their entire future? Jake, I need you to explain something to me. I just checked our savings account. Silence stretched across the phone line. Maria could hear Jake's breathing change, becoming shallow and rapid. Maria, I can explain. It's not what you think. It's not what I think. Jake, there's $47 left in an account that had $18,000 3 months ago. What exactly should I be thinking? I've been trying to make money for us. I found some investment opportunities, and I thought if I could just make a few good moves, I could surprise you with even more money than we started with. Maria closed her eyes, feeling the last of her trust crumble. Investment opportunities? Jake, these are casino withdrawals, sports betting transfers. You've been gambling away our savings while I've been risking my life here every day. It started as investing, I swear, but then I had some bad luck and I thought I could win it back. I never meant for it to go this far. How far? How much have you lost? Another long silence. Maria, I love you. We can fix this. I'll get a job. I'll pay it all back. How much, Jake? Everything. I lost everything. Maria drove home in a haze of disbelief and rage, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The familiar route from Desert Valley Medical Center to their apartment complex seemed different somehow, as if the landscape itself had been altered by Jake's betrayal. She passed the coffee shop where they had spent hours planning their future, the bank where they had opened their joint account with such optimism, the little park where Jake had proposed 2.5 years ago. Sunny Meadows Apartments had never looked particularly sunny or meadowy, but it had been home. The complex was a collection of 2-story beige buildings surrounding a small pool that was perpetually under maintenance. Maria and Jake lived in Unit 2B, a modest 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and a view of the parking lot. They had chosen it because the rent was affordable and it was only 15 minutes from the hospital, allowing Maria to get home quickly between shifts. Jake's truck was in their assigned parking space, which meant he was home waiting for her. Maria sat in her car for several minutes, trying to prepare herself for a conversation that would either save their marriage or end it. She thought about the promises they had made to each other, the vows about supporting each other through better and worse. She had never imagined that worse would involve financial betrayal while she was literally saving lives during a global pandemic. The apartment felt different the moment she opened the door. Jake was sitting on their small couch, his head in his hands, surrounded by papers that Maria had never seen before. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan documents, the evidence of a secret life that he had been living parallel to their marriage. "Maria, I'm so sorry," he said without looking up. "I know how this looks, but I never meant for it to happen this way." Maria set down her purse and keys, her movements deliberate and controlled. She was drawing on the same emotional regulation, skills that allowed her to function during medical emergencies, compartmentalizing her feelings so she could process information clearly. "I need you to explain everything, Jake. Not just the gambling, but how you've been lying to me for months while I've been working myself to exhaustion." Jake looked up, and Maria saw that he had been crying. His eyes were red and swollen. His usually confident posture collapsed into something that looked broken and ashamed. "It started when I lost the construction job. I felt like such a failure, like I was letting you down by not being able to provide. You were working so hard, and I was just sitting here feeling useless." "So you decided to gamble our savings?" "No, it wasn't like that at first. I was looking for ways to make money, maybe start a small business or invest in something that could grow. I saw these online trading platforms, and they made it seem so easy to make quick profits." Maria sat down across from him, her medical training kicking in as she recognized the signs of addiction she had seen in patients. The justifications, the gradual escalation, the inability to stop despite mounting consequences. When did trading become gambling? The lines got blurred. Some of the platforms offered sports betting alongside trading, and I started small, just $20 or $50 here and there. When I won, it felt incredible, like I had finally found something I was good at, like I could be the provider you deserved. And when you lost, I told myself it was just temporary bad luck, that if I bet a little more, I could win back what I had lost plus extra. I started researching teams and players, convincing myself I had developed a system. Maria felt sick listening to the familiar pattern of addictive thinking. She had seen it in patients struggling with substance abuse, the way logic became twisted to justify increasingly destructive behavior. "Jake, you've stolen $18,000 from our future. Our house fund, our emergency savings, everything we worked for together. How could you risk all of that on sports games?" "I never thought of it as stealing. It was our money, and I was trying to multiply it for us. Every bet felt like it could be the one that would make us rich, that would let me surprise you with financial security beyond what we had ever imagined. But instead, you've left us with nothing. Worse than nothing, actually. What are all these other papers?" Jake's shoulders sagged further. "Credit card cash advances I borrowed against our future to try to win back what I had lost." Catherine's family had been calling regularly for updates, and Maria looked forward to delivering genuinely good news for the first time in weeks. "Her oxygen levels have been stable for 12 hours, Dr. Foster explained as they reviewed Catherine's chart. "Respiratory rate is normal. Chest x-rays show clearing. I think she's ready to breathe on her own." The extubation process required careful monitoring and immediate response capability if Catherine's breathing became compromised. Maria positioned herself at Catherine's bedside, watching every indicator while Dr. Foster carefully removed the breathing tube that had kept Catherine alive for over a week. Catherine's first independent breath was shallow but steady, followed by a small cough as her throat adjusted to functioning without mechanical assistance. Her eyes opened more clearly than they had since her admission, focusing on Maria's face with recognition and gratitude. "Water," Catherine whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakably her own. Maria provided small ice chips, helping Catherine wet her throat while monitoring her breathing carefully. This was the moment that made every aspect of nursing worthwhile, watching someone transition from life support back to independent existence, witnessing the resilience of the human body and spirit. "Your family is going to be so happy," Maria told Catherine softly. Your son David has been calling every day, and your daughter Sophie is driving down from Flagstaff specifically to see you. Catherine tried to smile, her hand reaching weakly toward Maria. Thank you for everything. You saved my life. The simple gratitude in Catherine's voice triggered an unexpected emotional response in Maria. After months of caring for COVID patients with varying outcomes, having someone clearly articulate their appreciation felt overwhelming. Maria had to step away briefly to compose herself, using the nurse's bathroom to process the complex emotions of witnessing medical success while her personal life crumbled. Elena found her there, recognizing the signs of someone trying to hold everything together through sheer willpower. It's okay to not be okay, Elena said gently. You've been through something traumatic, and you're allowed to feel it. I can't fall apart here, Maria replied, splashing cold water on her face. These patients need me to be strong and focused. Mrs. Liu just took her first independent breath in over a week. I should be celebrating, not crying in the bathroom, because my husband turned out to be a gambling addict who stole our future. You can do both. Professional competence and personal pain aren't mutually exclusive. You're human, Maria, not a medical robot. They returned to the ICU together, where Catherine's family had begun arriving for their first real visit since her admission. David Liu, Catherine's son, was a man in his early 40s with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he was accustomed to managing crises. His restaurant had been struggling during the pandemic, but he had maintained his staff and found creative ways to serve the community during lockdowns. Sophie Liu arrived an hour later, still wearing scrubs from her shift at Phoenix Children's Hospital. As a pediatric doctor, she understood the medical complexities of her mother's case and had been advocating professionally for Catherine's care while managing her own emotional devastation at potentially losing her mother. Maria watched the family reunion from a respectful distance, observing the tears of relief and gratitude as Catherine spoke to her children for the first time in over a week. The love and support surrounding Catherine stood in stark contrast to Maria's own isolation, highlighting the absence of partnership that had been revealed by Jake's betrayal. David Liu approached Maria as visiting hours ended, his expression serious but grateful. Nurse Santos, I wanted to thank you personally for the care you've given my mother. The other staff members tell me you've been advocating for her around the clock, that you've gone above and beyond standard care. That's what we do here, Maria replied, deflecting praise automatically. Your mother is a fighter. She did the hard work of healing. Still, my family recognizes exceptional care when we see it. My mother mentioned that you've been showing her pictures of desert wildflowers, talking to her about gardening when she was too weak to respond. That kind of human connection goes beyond medical treatment. Maria felt the familiar warmth that came from knowing her work had made a difference, but it was tempered by the emotional exhaustion of maintaining professional competence while processing personal betrayal. I'm just glad she's recovering. She should be able to go home in a few days if her progress continues. David studied Maria's face, his expression shifting from gratitude to concern. Are you all right? You look like you're carrying more than professional stress. The unexpected personal attention from a patient's family member caught Maria off guard. She was accustomed to providing comfort and support to others, not receiving it from people who had their own serious concerns. I'm fine, just tired. It's been a long few months with the pandemic. I understand. My restaurant has been barely surviving, and I know the pressure of feeling responsible for other people's well-being. If there's anything my family can do to support the staff here, please let us know. You've given us our mother back. As David rejoined his family, Maria realized that she had spent so much energy caring for others that she had forgotten what it felt like to be cared for in return. Jake's betrayal had left her feeling completely alone. but the genuine concern from Catherine's family reminded her that human connection could exist without the complications of romantic partnership. The remainder of her shift passed in a blur of routine medical tasks, but Maria found herself returning repeatedly to Catherine's room, drawn by the peaceful presence of someone who had survived a life-threatening crisis with grace and dignity. Catherine's recovery represented hope in a way that Maria desperately needed to witness, proof that people could overcome devastating circumstances and emerge stronger. 3 days later, Catherine Liu was officially discharged from Desert Valley Medical Center, her recovery complete enough to continue healing at home with outpatient follow-up care. Maria had worked the morning shift and was preparing to leave when David Liu appeared at the nurse's station carrying a large bouquet of desert wildflowers and a sealed envelope. "Nurse Santos, I was hoping to catch you before you left. My family wanted to express our gratitude properly." Maria accepted the flowers, recognizing several varieties she had shown Catherine in photographs during her recovery. The gesture was thoughtful and personal, reflecting the kind of attention to detail that had characterized Catherine's family throughout her hospitalization. "These are beautiful, but really not necessary. Seeing your mother recover was gift enough." "Please open the envelope," David said, his expression serious but warm. Inside was a handwritten letter from Catherine, written in careful script that betrayed the weakness she was still overcoming. The letter thanked Maria for specific moments of care, mentioning conversations and small kindnesses that Maria had assumed went unnoticed during Catherine's critical illness. But attached to the letter was something that made Maria's hands tremble, a check made out to her personally for $5,000. "I can't accept this," Maria said immediately, trying to hand the check back to David. "It's against hospital policy, and it's far too generous." "It's not payment for medical care," David explained. "It's a personal gift from our family to someone who went beyond professional requirements to provide comfort during our darkest time. Still, I can't take money from patients' families. It doesn't feel right." David leaned against the nurse's station, his posture suggesting he had anticipated this conversation and prepared for Maria's resistance. "Can I tell you something about my family? My mother spent 40 years teaching in public schools, often using her own money to buy supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them. I thought if I could just have one good night, one big win, I could replace everything and you would never have to know." Maria picked up one of the credit card statements, scanning the charges with growing horror. Cash advances totaling over $12,000, all at astronomical interest rates that would take years to pay off, even if they made minimum payments. "So, we don't just have no savings, we're actually $30,000 in debt?" "I was going to tell you, I had a plan to fix everything. Your plan was to gamble more money. I know how it sounds, but I was getting better at reading the games. I had been tracking my wins and losses, and I thought I had figured out a pattern." Maria stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the parking lot. She could see her Honda Civic, 12 years old with 180,000 miles, representing the modest but honest life she had been trying to build. Next to it was Jake's truck, which she now realized might be financed with money they couldn't afford to repay. "Jake, I've been working 14-hour shifts in a COVID ward, watching people die, risking my own health every single day. I come home exhausted and worried about money, and you've been here gambling away our future while pretending to support me. I do support you. I love you more than anything. You love the idea of being the kind of husband who provides for his wife, but instead of actually finding work or contributing to our household, you've been chasing fantasies while I carry all the real responsibility." The silence that followed was filled with the weight of 3 years of marriage collapsing under the pressure of betrayal and broken trust. Maria thought about all the times Jake had seemed supportive, bringing her dinner after difficult shifts, listening to her stories about patience, encouraging her to take care of herself. Had any of it been real, or was it all performance designed to hide his secret life? "What do you want me to do?" Jake asked finally. "I want you to get help, real help, not just promises to stop. I want you to find a job and start paying back this debt. And I want you to move out while I figure out whether our marriage can survive this. Maria, please, I'll do anything, but don't make me leave. We can work through this together. Together." "Jake, there is no together anymore. You made all these decisions alone, without consulting me, while actively deceiving me. I can't trust you to be in the same apartment with our remaining $47. Jake began to cry again, the kind of desperate weeping that comes from finally understanding the full scope of consequences. But Maria felt detached from his pain, her emotional resources already depleted by months of pandemic nursing and the shock of discovering the depth of his betrayal. "I need you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. We can talk more later, but right now I can't even look at you without feeling sick. Where am I supposed to go? Call your brother, stay with a friend, I don't care. Figure it out the same way you figured out how to steal our savings without me noticing." As Jake gathered his belongings, moving through their shared space, like a stranger, Maria thought about the conversation she would need to have with Elena tomorrow. Her best friend would want to help, would probably offer financial support that Maria couldn't accept. She thought about calling her mother, Rosa, but couldn't bear the idea of explaining how she had been so thoroughly deceived by the man she had promised to love and trust. Most of all, she thought about Mrs. Catherine Liu, who was fighting for her life with dignity and grace while surrounded by family members who would never dream of betraying her trust. Maria had been providing comfort and hope to Catherine's family, assuring them that their loved one was receiving the best possible care, while her own life was crumbling due to the selfishness of someone who was supposed to protect her. Jake paused at the door, turning back with one final attempt at reconciliation. "Maria, I know I've destroyed everything, but I still love you. That was never fake." Maria looked at him, this man she had chosen to build a life with, and felt nothing but emptiness where love used to live. "Love isn't just a feeling, Jake. It's a choice you make every day to put someone else's well-being alongside your own. You chose gambling over our marriage, fantasy over reality, selfishness over partnership. Whatever you think you feel for me, it's not love." After he left, Maria sat alone in their apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their financial ruin and the wreckage of her trust. She had 12 hours before her next shift at the hospital, where she would need to summon the emotional strength to care for patients and support their families, while her own world had just collapsed. Maria woke up at 4:30 a.m. after 3 hours of fitful sleep, her body automatically preparing for another shift even though her mind felt fractured and raw. The apartment was eerily quiet without Jake's presence. No sound of him getting ready for yet another day of unemployment that she now understood had been filled with secret gambling sessions. She moved through her morning routine mechanically, shower, coffee, checking her work bag for the supplies that had become essential during the pandemic. The face staring back at her from the bathroom mirror looked older than her 29 years, marked by exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and no amount of concealer could hide the evidence of her emotional devastation. Maria had always prided herself on maintaining professional composure regardless of personal circumstances, but today would test that ability to its limits. The drive to Desert Valley Medical Center felt surreal, as if she were moving through a world that had fundamentally changed overnight. The same radio DJs discussed traffic and weather, the same commuters filled the highways, but Maria felt disconnected from the normalcy surrounding her. How could everything look the same when her entire foundation had crumbled? Elena was waiting in the parking lot, having arrived early specifically to intercept Maria before the shift began. She had brought coffee and a breakfast sandwich, knowing that Maria probably hadn't eaten since learning about Jake's betrayal. "How are you holding up?" Elena asked, studying Maria's face with the practiced eye of someone who understood trauma. "I asked him to leave," Maria said simply, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I can't trust him in the same space as our remaining $47. "Good. That took strength. What's your plan?" "I don't have one yet. Work, survive, figure out how to pay rent next month. The credit card debt alone is going to take years to resolve, assuming I can even make minimum payments on my salary." Elena walked beside her toward the hospital entrance, her presence a steady comfort in the chaos of Maria's new reality. They had been friends since nursing school, sharing the intense bond that forms between people who have witnessed each other's growth through the most challenging aspects of healthcare training. "You know I can help with money if you need it," Elena offered carefully, knowing that Maria's pride would make accepting assistance difficult. "I appreciate that, but I need to figure this out myself. Taking money from friends feels too much, like the financial dependency that got me into this mess." The 7th floor ICU was buzzing with typical morning activity. Nurses receiving reports from the night shift, doctors making rounds, the complex choreography of modern medical care. Beginning another day, Maria threw herself into work with renewed intensity, using the familiar demands of patient care to distract herself from the wreckage of her personal life. Mrs. Catherine Liu's condition had continued to improve overnight, and Dr. Foster was optimistic about proceeding with extubation that morning. She believes in recognizing people who dedicate their lives to serving others, especially when they make personal sacrifices to do so. Maria felt uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, unsure why David seemed to know more about her personal circumstances than a patient's family member should. "I don't understand what you mean about personal sacrifices. My sister Sophie works in healthcare, so she understands the financial challenges that nurses face, especially during the pandemic. Long hours, emotional stress, modest pay despite the critical importance of your work. That's true for all healthcare workers. We chose this profession knowing the realities." David nodded, his expression thoughtful. "But you've been working extra shifts, picking up overtime whenever possible. Some of the other nurses mentioned that you've been taking on additional responsibilities to help support your household." Maria felt a chill of recognition, wondering how much the hospital staff had observed about her increased work schedule and whether anyone had speculated about her reasons for seeking extra income. "David, I appreciate your family's gratitude, but I really can't accept financial gifts from patients. What if it wasn't from patients? What if it was from community members who believe in supporting essential workers?" Before Maria could respond, Elena appeared beside them, having finished her own shift preparations. "Maria, are these the wildflowers Mrs. Liu wanted you to have? They're gorgeous." "Elena, this is David Liu, Catherine's son. David, this is Elena Rodriguez, my best friend and fellow nurse." David shook Elena's hand, his expression brightening with apparent recognition. "Elena, perfect timing. I was just trying to convince Maria to accept a small token of appreciation from our family, but she's being characteristically stubborn about it." Elena glanced between them, her intuition immediately picking up on the tension in the conversation. "What kind of token?" David handed Elena the check, watching her expression carefully as she processed the amount. "This is very generous, but Maria's right to be cautious. Hospital policies about gifts can be strict, which is why I've already spoken with Dr. Foster about the best way to handle this. She suggested that if the gift were presented as community support rather than patient payment, it might be more acceptable." Maria looked at Elena, seeking guidance from someone who understood both hospital politics and her current financial desperation. Elena's expression was thoughtful, considering the ethical implications alongside Maria's obvious need. "Maria, maybe you should at least talk to Dr. Foster before making a final decision. Understanding the policy completely might help you feel more comfortable." David seized on Elena's suggestion immediately. "Dr. Foster is still here, making her afternoon rounds. Would you be willing to have that conversation now?" Maria felt pressured by the combined attention of David and Elena, both of whom seemed invested in her accepting assistance that her pride was inclined to refuse. But the practical reality of her financial situation made it difficult to dismiss any potential help, especially when it was being offered so respectfully. "Fine, but I'm not making any promises. If Dr. Foster says it's inappropriate, that's the end of the discussion." They found Dr. Foster in her office, reviewing patient charts and preparing for the evening shift transition. Amanda looked up as they entered, her expression shifting from professional focus to personal interest as she recognized David. "David, how is your mother adjusting to being home?" "Very well, thank you. She's already talking about returning to her garden, which my sister says is a good sign of cognitive recovery." "Excellent. What can I help you with?" David explained the situation clearly and directly, presenting the gift as family gratitude rather than payment for services. Dr. Foster listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Maria to assess her comfort level with the conversation. "Maria, what are your concerns about accepting this?" "It feels wrong to take money from patients' families, even if it's presented as a gift. I don't want to set a precedent or create ethical conflicts." Dr. Foster nodded approvingly. "Those are appropriate concerns. However, healthcare workers do occasionally receive gifts from grateful families, and hospital policy allows for personal gifts under certain circumstances." What circumstances? "The gift must be clearly personal rather than professional. It can't create conflicts of interest or expectations of preferential treatment, and it should be proportionate to the family's means rather than excessive." David interjected gently. "My family owns a successful restaurant, and this amount represents gratitude rather than financial hardship for us." Dr. Foster continued, "Maria, given your exemplary service during the pandemic and the personal nature of the connection you formed with Mrs. Liu, I don't see any ethical problems with accepting this gift." Elena squeezed Maria's shoulder supportively. "Maybe you should consider it as recognition of your dedication rather than charity." Maria looked around the room at these three people who seemed genuinely invested in her well-being, each offering support from their own perspective and expertise. The practical voice in her head calculated how much the $5,000 would help with immediate expenses, how it might provide breathing room while she figured out her longer-term financial situation. "If I were to accept this, hypothetically, what would be the proper way to handle it?" Dr. Foster smiled, recognizing Maria's shift toward acceptance. "Document it as a personal gift rather than professional payment. Send a formal thank you note to the family and use it in whatever way best supports your personal needs." David extended the check toward Maria again, his expression hopeful but patient. "Our family would be honored if you would accept this as recognition of the care and compassion you showed during one of the most difficult periods of our lives." Maria took the check slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she realized how much this unexpected support might change her immediate circumstances. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take care of yourself the way you take care of others," David replied. "That's all we want." As they left Dr. Foster's office, Elena walked beside Maria in companionable silence, allowing her friend time to process this unexpected development. "This doesn't solve everything," Maria said finally. "I still have $30,000 in debt and a marriage that's probably over." "No, but it gives you options. Sometimes that's enough to start rebuilding. That evening, Maria sat in her empty apartment holding the check and thinking about the contrast between David Liu's genuine appreciation and Jake's selfish betrayal. One man had recognized her value and chosen to support her, while another had exploited her trust and stolen her security. For the first time since discovering Jake's gambling addiction, Maria felt a small spark of hope about her future. The road ahead would still be difficult, but she was no longer walking it entirely alone. Jake Santos sat in his brother Miguel's cramped studio apartment, staring at his phone as another blocked call went unanswered. He'd been trying to reach Maria for 3 days, sending increasingly desperate text messages that oscillated between apology and anger. The reality of his situation was becoming clearer with each passing hour, and the weight of what he had destroyed was crushing him in ways he hadn't anticipated. Miguel's apartment was in a rough part of Phoenix, the kind of neighborhood where people minded their own business and asked few questions. The walls were thin, the air conditioning struggled against the desert heat, and the constant noise from the street below made sleep nearly impossible. It was a far cry from the modest comfort Jake had shared with Maria, and the contrast served as a daily reminder of how dramatically his life had changed. "You can't stay here forever," Miguel said, emerging from the kitchenette with 2 cups of instant coffee. Miguel was 5 years younger than Jake, a mechanic who worked honest hours for honest pay, and had never understood his brother's need for shortcuts and get-rich-quick schemes. "I know. I'm trying to figure things out. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're feeling sorry for yourself while your wife is dealing with the mess you created." Jake looked up sharply, his shame quickly transforming into defensive anger. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Maria was working all those extra shifts, risking her life every day, and I couldn't even find a job. I felt worthless." So you decided to steal her money instead of dealing with your feelings like an adult." The blunt assessment stung because it was accurate. Jake had constructed elaborate justifications for his gambling, convincing himself that he was investing in their future rather than destroying it. But sitting in Miguel's apartment with nothing but a bag of clothes and a maxed-out credit card, the delusions were impossible to maintain. "I thought I could win it back. There were times when I was ahead, when it seemed like I had figured out a system." Miguel shook his head in disgust. "That's what every gambling addict tells themselves. The house always wins, Jake. The only system is designed to take your money." What Miguel didn't know was that Jake's problems extended beyond the stolen savings and credit card debt. In his desperation to find bigger betting opportunities, Jake had borrowed money from people who didn't accept excuses or payment plans. Men who had seemed friendly and accommodating when offering quick loans, but who became significantly less understanding when payments were missed. Tony Ricci operated what he called an alternative lending service out of a strip mall office between a check-cashing business and a discount phone store. To desperate people with poor credit and immediate needs, Tony appeared to be a financial lifeline. He offered cash loans with minimal paperwork and flexible approval criteria, presenting himself as someone who understood that good people sometimes faced temporary difficulties. What Tony's clients discovered too late was that his interest rates were astronomical and his collection methods were creative and persistent. The friendly demeanor that characterized initial interactions disappeared completely when payments were late, replaced by a coldness that made his expectations crystal clear. Jake had borrowed $8,000 from Tony 6 weeks ago, convinced that one perfect night of sports betting would allow him to repay the loan and keep the profits. The loan terms had seemed reasonable at the time, $10,000 due in 8 weeks, a $2,000 fee that Jake viewed as the cost of accessing capital that banks wouldn't provide. But Jake's perfect night had never materialized. Instead, he had lost the entire $8,000 in a single weekend of increasingly desperate bets, each loss driving him to risk more in a futile attempt to recover his position. When the 8-week deadline passed without payment, Tony's patience evaporated. The first reminder had been a phone call, polite but firm, suggesting that Jake contact Tony's office to discuss a payment plan. When Jake didn't respond, the calls became more frequent and the tone more threatening. Tony made it clear that he had invested significant resources in Jake's loan and expected full repayment, plus additional fees for the inconvenience of collection efforts. Jake's phone buzzed with another unknown number, the 5th different number Tony had used that day. Jake let it go to voicemail, knowing that each ignored call was making his situation worse, but unable to face another conversation about money he didn't have. The voicemail was brief and direct. "Jake, this is Tony. We need to talk today. I've been very patient, but my patience has limits. Call me back in the next 4 hours, or I'll have to explore other collection options." Miguel noticed Jake's expression change as he listened to the message. "What's wrong now?" "Nothing. Just work stuff." "Jake, you don't have a job." "Who was that?" Jake considered lying, but the accumulated weight of deception had become too heavy to maintain. He was tired of creating elaborate stories to cover his mistakes, exhausted by the mental energy required to keep track of all the different versions of reality he had constructed. "I borrowed money from someone, a private lender. The payment is overdue." Miguel's expression shifted from annoyance to genuine concern. "How much money?" $10,000, plus fees and interest for being late." "Jesus, Jake, what kind of lender charges fees like that?" "The kind that lends to people with no collateral and no credit." Miguel stood up abruptly, pacing the small space with nervous energy. "Are you talking about loan sharks? Jake, please tell me you didn't borrow money from criminals." "Tony's not a criminal. He runs a legitimate business. Legitimate businesses don't threaten people for missed payments. How did you even find this guy?" Jake's silence answered the question. Miguel had grown up in the same neighborhood, understood the ecosystem of predatory lending that thrived on desperation and poor decision-making. "You found him through gambling connections. Other people at the casino told you about easy money." "It seemed like a reasonable solution at the time. I thought I could pay it back quickly." "With what? You don't have a job. You've stolen your wife's savings, and now you owe money to people who break legs for a living." Miguel's assessment was harsh, but accurate. Jake had created a web of financial obligation that extended far beyond what Maria knew about, complications that could potentially put her in danger if Tony's collection efforts escalated. "I need to figure out how to handle this without involving Maria. She's already dealing with enough because of my mistakes. Jake, if these people are as dangerous as I think they are, Maria needs to know. She needs to be able to protect herself. I can't tell her about this. She'll never forgive me for putting her at risk." Miguel laughed bitterly. "She's not going to forgive you anyway. You stole her money and lied to her for months. Adding physical danger to financial betrayal isn't going to make things worse." Jake's phone buzzed again, another unknown number. This time he answered, hoping to buy more time through negotiation. "Jake, I'm disappointed that you haven't returned my calls." Tony's voice was calm, but carried an undertone of menace that made Jake's stomach clench. "Tony, I'm working on getting your money. I just need a little more time." "Time is a luxury you can't afford. My original terms were very generous and you've taken advantage of my patience." "I understand, but my situation is complicated right now. My wife found out about some financial problems, and I'm staying somewhere else temporarily. Your personal problems don't affect our business arrangement. I need my money, plus the additional fees we discussed for late payment." Jake's hands were trembling as he tried to calculate numbers that didn't add up to any realistic solution. How much are we talking about total? $15,000, the original 10 plus 5,000 in collection fees and extended interest. The amount was impossible. Even if Jake found full-time employment immediately, it would take months to accumulate that kind of money, and Tony's tone suggested that months weren't available. Tony, I don't have $15,000. I don't have any money. Then you need to find it. I suggest you start with family members who might be willing to help you avoid more serious consequences. The implication was clear. Tony expected Jake to involve Maria or other family members in resolving his debt, using their resources to clean up his mistakes. I can't ask my wife for money. She doesn't know about this debt, and she's already dealing with financial problems because of other issues. Jake, I'm not interested in your marital difficulties. I'm interested in being repaid for money I advanced in good faith. What if I could pay you back gradually? Maybe $500 a month until the debt is settled. Tony's laugh was cold and humorless. $500 a month for 30 months? That's not how my business works. I need substantial payment now, or we'll need to explore alternative arrangements. Jake understood that alternative arrangements meant physical intimidation, damage to property, or threats against people he cared about. Tony's business model depended on fear as much as interest, using the threat of violence to ensure compliance from clients who couldn't repay their debts through conventional means. Give me 1 week. I'll find a way to get you significant money by next Friday. 1 week, Jake. 7 days. If I don't hear from you with a realistic payment plan, I'll have to take steps to protect my investment. After Tony hung up, Jake sat in silence, contemplating the magnitude of his situation. He had destroyed his marriage, stolen his wife's savings, accumulated massive credit card debt, and now owed money to someone who might resort to violence for collection. Each decision had seemed logical in isolation, but the accumulated weight of his choices had created an impossible situation. Miguel had been listening to Jake's side of the conversation, his expression growing more concerned as the implications became clear. Jake, you need to tell Maria about this. If this Tony guy is willing to threaten you, he might be willing to threaten her too. I can't. She's already asked me to move out. If she finds out I've borrowed money from loan sharks, she'll never speak to me again. She's going to be safer knowing about the threat than being surprised by it. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Jake, this is Tony's associate. We know where you work and where your wife works. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. The message included a photo of Desert Valley Medical Center's main entrance, taken recently enough to show current construction barriers and staff parking areas. Tony's people had been watching Maria's workplace, gathering information about her schedule and routine. Miguel read the message over Jake's shoulder, his face pale with recognition of the escalating threat. Jake, they're already involving Maria. You have to warn her. Jake stared at the photo of Maria's hospital, realizing that his attempt to protect her from the consequences of his actions had failed completely. Tony's organization had already identified her as a potential source of pressure, a way to motivate Jake toward payment through threats against someone he loved. What am I supposed to tell her? That while she was working in a COVID ward, I was not only stealing her money, but also borrowing from criminals who might hurt her. You tell her the truth, all of it. Then you figure out how to keep her safe. And while you deal with this mess, Jake looked at his phone, at Maria's number in his contacts, and tried to imagine the conversation that would reveal the full scope of his betrayal. She already knew about the gambling and the stolen savings, but learning about the loan shark debt would add a layer of physical danger that she had never consented to accept. But the text message with the hospital photo made it clear that Maria was already involved, whether she knew it or not. Tony's people had made her a target, and keeping her ignorant would only make her more vulnerable. "I'll call her," Jake said finally, "but I don't think she's going to answer." "Then you go to the hospital. You find her and you tell her in person. This isn't something you can handle through voicemail." Jake gathered his keys and wallet, steeling himself for a conversation that would likely end any remaining possibility of reconciliation with Maria. But Miguel was right. Maria's safety was more important than Jake's shame, and she needed to understand the danger his actions had created. As he drove toward Desert Valley Medical Center, Jake tried to formulate words that could explain the magnitude of his failures without minimizing their impact. He had 6 days to find $15,000 or face consequences that would extend beyond his own suffering to potentially harm the woman he claimed to love. The hospital parking lot was familiar territory, a place where Jake had picked up Maria after countless shifts, where they had shared plans and dreams during a time when their future seemed secure. Now he was returning as someone who had betrayed every promise he had made, carrying news that would shatter any remaining trust Maria might have maintained. Jake parked near the employee entrance and composed a text message asking Maria to meet him outside for an urgent conversation. He stared at the message for several minutes before sending it, knowing that each word brought him closer to revealing the full extent of his destruction. Maria was in the middle of administering medication to a COVID patient when her phone buzzed with Jake's text message. She glanced at it briefly, her heart sinking as she read his request to meet outside for an urgent conversation. After 3 days of ignored calls and increasingly desperate messages, she had no desire to see Jake, especially not at her workplace where she needed to maintain professional composure. She finished her medication round and showed the message to Elena, who was charting notes at the nurse's station. "He says it's urgent and he's waiting in the parking lot," Maria said, her voice tight with frustration. "I don't want to see him, but what if something's actually wrong?" Elena studied Maria's expression, recognizing the conflict between anger and residual concern that characterized relationships damaged by betrayal. "Do you want me to come with you? You don't have to face him alone." "I can handle Jake. I just don't understand why he can't respect my request for space." Maria walked toward the elevator with reluctance, her stomach churning with anxiety about what Jake might want to discuss. She had been clear about needing time to process his betrayal, and his persistence felt like another violation of her boundaries. The late afternoon heat hit her immediately as she exited the hospital, the Arizona sun creating shimmering waves on the asphalt parking lot. Jake was leaning against his truck near the employee entrance, his posture tense and his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. "Maria, thank you for coming down. I know you don't want to see me." "You're right, I don't. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait for me to call you back?" Jake looked around the parking lot nervously, as if checking to see whether they were being observed. His behavior struck Maria as odd, more paranoid than she was accustomed to seeing. "There's something else I need to tell you about our financial situation, something I didn't mention before." Maria felt her stomach drop. The revelation about the gambling and stolen savings had been devastating enough. The idea that there were additional secrets felt overwhelming. What else could there possibly be, Jake? "You've already stolen everything we had and maxed out our credit cards. I borrowed money from someone, a private lender. The payment is overdue, and they're starting to make threats." The words hit Maria like physical blows. She had been processing the betrayal of the gambling addiction and stolen savings, but the idea that Jake had introduced additional financial complications felt incomprehensible. How much money? $15,000 total, including fees and interest. Maria's legs felt weak. She leaned against the nearest car, trying to process the magnitude of what Jake was telling her. 15,000 on top of the 30,000 in credit card debt. Jake, we're $50,000 in debt because of your gambling. It's worse than that. The people I borrowed from aren't like banks. They don't accept payment plans or negotiate terms. Something in Jake's tone made Maria look at him more carefully. He looked genuinely frightened, not just ashamed or guilty, but actually afraid of something immediate and physical. What kind of people did you borrow money from? Private lenders? People who help when banks won't approve loans? You mean loan sharks? Jake's silence confirmed her suspicion. Maria felt a new kind of horror wash over her as she realized that Jake's financial betrayal had potentially put her in physical danger. Jake, please tell me you didn't borrow money from criminals. They're not criminals exactly. It's more like an alternative lending business. Don't lie to me anymore. You've borrowed money from loan sharks, haven't you? Jake's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it nervously before showing Maria the screen. The message was from an unknown number. Jake, we see you talking to your wife. Don't forget our deadline. Maria stared at the message, her nursing training automatically assessing the threat level, while her personal emotions struggled to process the implications. They're watching us right now? I think so. They sent me a picture of the hospital earlier today. They've been surveilling my workplace? Jake, what have you done? The full scope of Jake's betrayal was becoming clear, extending beyond financial theft to active endangerment. Maria looked around the parking lot with new awareness, wondering if dangerous people were observing their conversation. I never meant for this to involve you. I thought I could handle it without you ever knowing. Handle it how? You don't have $15,000. You don't have any money. I was hoping to find work, maybe borrow from family. Maria's anger flared with renewed intensity. You were planning to involve our families in cleaning up your gambling debts after everything you've already stolen and destroyed. I don't have any other options. Yes, you do. You can tell these people that you don't have their money and deal with the consequences yourself. You can face the police and report the threats. You can take responsibility for your choices instead of spreading the damage to everyone around you. Jake's expression became desperate, his voice taking on a pleading quality that Maria had never heard before. Maria, these aren't people you say no to. They expect payment and they don't care about my personal problems or my marriage. Then you should have thought about that before you borrowed money from them. Another text message arrived on Jake's phone, this one containing a photo of Maria walking into the hospital that morning. She was clearly identifiable, wearing scrubs and carrying the coffee cup Elena had brought her. They've been following me, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. Maria felt a cold rage building inside her, different from the hurt and disappointment she had experienced when learning about the gambling. This was violation on a level that threatened her basic safety and autonomy. You've made me a target. Jake, these people know where I work. They're taking pictures of me and they're using me to pressure you for money. I'll figure out how to pay them. I won't let anything happen to you. You'll figure it out with what money? You've stolen everything we had and borrowed against everything we might earn in the future. Jake's phone rang, displaying a number he recognized as Tony's office. He looked at Maria helplessly before answering. Jake, I hope you're having a productive conversation with your wife. Tony's voice was loud enough for Maria to hear clearly. We're talking. Good. I'm sure she'll understand the importance of resolving our business arrangement quickly. Maria grabbed the phone from Jake's hand, her anger overriding her caution. This is Maria Santos. I don't know who you are, but you need to stop threatening my husband and stop surveilling my workplace. Tony's laugh was cold and calculating. Mrs. Santos, it's a pleasure to speak with you directly. Your husband owes me money, and I'm simply encouraging prompt payment. My husband's debts are his responsibility, not mine. I'm not involved. In whatever arrangement you made with him, I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate. When someone borrows money from me, their family becomes part of the collateral. Jake's inability to repay creates problems that affect everyone close to him. The casual way Tony discussed using her as leverage made Maria's blood run cold. She understood that this was not an empty threat, but a business model that depended on intimidating family members. I'm calling the police. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved. The police can't protect you every hour of every day, and my business relationships extend beyond what law enforcement can monitor. Maria hung up, her hands shaking with a combination of fear and rage. She turned to Jake with an expression he had never seen before, something beyond anger that approached genuine hatred. You've destroyed everything, Jake. Our marriage, our finances, our safety, our future. Everything. I can fix this. No, you can't. This isn't something you can fix with another bet or another loan or another lie. You've borrowed money from people who are willing to threaten innocent people, and there's no amount of sorry that makes that acceptable. Jake reached toward her, but Maria stepped back, her body language making it clear that she wanted no physical contact. Don't touch me, don't call me, don't come to my workplace again. I never want to see you. Maria, please, I love you. You love yourself. You love the fantasy of being someone important and successful. You don't love me, because people who love each other don't steal their savings and borrow money from criminals. Maria walked back toward the hospital entrance, her legs unsteady, but her resolve firm. She needed to get inside, away from the parking lot where dangerous people might be watching, and figure out how to protect herself from threats she had never consented to face. Elena was waiting by the elevator, having watched through the window. As the conversation in the parking lot became increasingly animated. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jake borrowed money from loan sharks, $15,000. They're threatening him and surveilling me. Elena's expression shifted from concern to alarm. They're watching you here? They sent him pictures of me arriving at work this morning. They called while we were talking and made it clear that they consider me part of the collateral for his debt. We need to call security and probably the police. Maria nodded, her professional training beginning to override her emotional shock. She needed to assess the threat systematically and take appropriate protective measures. First, I need to call Dr. Foster and let her know what's happening. Hospital security should be aware that there might be people watching the staff parking lot. As they rode the elevator back to the 7th floor, Maria tried to process the full scope of her new reality. She was not only dealing with financial ruin and marital betrayal, but also physical threats from people who considered her an acceptable target for collecting debts she had never agreed to assume. The irony was bitter. While she had been dedicating her life to healing and protecting others, the person closest to her had been actively endangering her safety and security. Jake's addiction had transformed her from a healthcare hero into a victim, someone who needed protection rather than someone who provided it. But Maria Santos was not someone who remained a victim for long. As the elevator opened onto the ICU floor, she was already planning how to regain control of her situation and ensure her safety while continuing the work that gave her life meaning. The first step would be documenting everything Jake had told her and everything Tony had said during their phone conversation. The second step would be involving law enforcement, regardless of Tony's threats about the limitations of police protection. Maria had spent her career helping people recover from devastating circumstances. Now she would need to apply that same determination and expertise to rebuilding her own life, this time with full awareness of the dangers that surrounded her. Dr. Amanda Foster listened to Maria's account with the focused attention she typically reserved for medical emergencies, taking notes on a legal pad as Maria described Jake's gambling addiction, the loan shark debt, and the threats that had extended to her workplace. Amanda's office felt like a sanctuary compared to the exposed vulnerability of the parking lot. But Maria knew that walls and security badges provided only limited protection from people who operated outside legal boundaries. The first priority is ensuring your immediate safety, Amanda said, setting down her pen. Hospital security needs to be briefed about potential threats, and we should consider modifying your schedule to make your movements less predictable. I don't want to disrupt patient care because of my personal problems. Maria, this isn't a personal problem anymore. When someone threatens our staff, it becomes a hospital security issue. We have protocols for protecting employees who face external threats. Elena had been quiet during Maria's recounting, but now she leaned forward with the intensity that characterized her approach to protecting people she cared about. Amanda, what about involving law enforcement? These people are clearly operating outside the law. Already on my list. Maria, you'll need to file a police report documenting the threats and providing all the evidence you have. Phone records, text messages, any communications from these lenders. Maria felt overwhelmed by the prospect of navigating police bureaucracy while maintaining her demanding work schedule. But she understood that official documentation was essential for any meaningful protection. I've never dealt with anything like this. I don't even know what kind of crime this is or which police department handles financial threats. Amanda picked up her phone and dialed an extension Maria didn't recognize. This is Dr. Foster. I need to speak with Detective Sarah Chen about a staff safety issue. Yes, I'll hold. Detective Chen works with our hospital liaison program, Amanda explained while waiting. She specializes in cases involving healthcare workers and has experience with financial crimes. 5 minutes later, Detective Chen was walking into Amanda's office carrying a digital recorder and a file folder that suggested she had handled similar situations before. Sarah Chen was a woman in her 40s with an efficient demeanor and the kind of direct eye contact that made people feel simultaneously reassured and scrutinized. Dr. Foster briefed me on the basic situation. Mrs. Santos, I need you to walk me through everything that happened, starting with when you first discovered the financial irregularities. Maria repeated her story for the third time that day, finding that each telling made the events feel more real and more overwhelming. Detective Chen asked specific questions about dates, amounts, and exact wording of threats, building a comprehensive record that could support legal action. The individual who called himself Tony, did he provide a business name or address? Jake mentioned something about an office in a strip mall, but I don't have specific details. And your husband is staying where currently? With his brother Miguel. I can give you that address. Detective Chen made notes about Miguel's apartment, explaining that she would need to interview Jake directly to gather information about Tony's operation and assess the credibility of the threats. Mrs. Santos, I want you to understand that loan sharking is a serious crime, and threatening family members to collect debts is felony extortion. These people are not operating a legitimate business, regardless of how they present themselves. What can you actually do to protect me? The man on the phone said police can't watch me all the time. He's correct that we can't provide round-the-clock protection, but we can investigate the loan operation, potentially make arrests, and help you obtain a restraining order. Most importantly, we can make it clear to these people that you're under police protection and that any harm to you will result in serious criminal charges. Elena interjected with a question that had been bothering her since Maria first described the threats. Detective, how common is this? Do loan sharks routinely target family members who weren't involved in the original debt? More common than people realize. Family intimidation is a standard collection technique because it's psychologically effective and difficult to prosecute. Most victims don't report the threats because they're ashamed of the underlying financial problems. Maria felt a mixture of relief and anger, learning that her situation wasn't unique. Relief that there were established procedures for handling such threats, anger that predatory lenders routinely terrorized innocent people to collect debts from addicted gamblers. What do I need to do? First, document everything. Keep records of all communications, don't delete text messages, and notify me immediately if you receive any additional contact from these people. Detective Chen handed Maria a business card with multiple phone numbers. Second, modify your routines. Don't leave work at the same time every day, don't park in the same location, and consider staying with friends or family for a few weeks while we investigate. I can't abandon my job because criminals are trying to collect my husband's gambling debts. I'm not suggesting you abandon anything. I'm suggesting you make yourself a more difficult target while we build a case against the people threatening you. Amanda had been listening carefully to the exchange, and now she offered practical solutions from the hospital's perspective. Maria, we can adjust your schedule to include more day shifts and fewer predictable patterns. Security can escort you to and from your car, and we can arrange temporary parking in the covered garage rather than the open lot. That feels like letting them win. Elena reached over and took Maria's hand gently. It's not about winning or losing. It's about staying safe while the professionals handle the criminals. Detective Chen gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but paused at the door with one final instruction. Mrs. Santos, I need you to call me before you have any further contact with your husband. He's a victim in this situation too, but he's also the person whose choices created the danger. Any conversations with him need to be coordinated with our investigation. After Detective Chen left, Maria sat in Amanda's office, feeling emotionally drained and practically overwhelmed. The simple life she had been trying to build had become complicated by factors completely outside her control, and the path forward seemed unclear and intimidating. I don't know how to do this, she admitted to Amanda and Elena. I became a nurse to help people, not to navigate criminal investigations and protective protocols. You help people by taking care of yourself first, Amanda replied. The patients need you healthy and safe, not heroic and endangered. Elena nodded in agreement. And you're not handling this alone. You have people who care about you and want to help. As if to emphasize Elena's point, Maria's phone buzzed with a text message from David Liu, Catherine's son. Mrs. Santos, my mother wanted me to check on you. She mentioned you seemed stressed during her follow-up call yesterday. Is everything all right? The message reminded Maria that there were people in her life who valued her well-being without expecting anything in return. A stark contrast to Jake's selfish choices that had created the current crisis. Would it be weird if I told him what's happening? Maria asked Eleanor. His family has been so supportive, and I could use perspective from people who understand crisis management. David runs a business and deals with difficult situations. Regularly, he might have practical advice about handling this kind of stress. Maria composed a careful response, explaining that she was dealing with some personal safety issues related to her husband's financial problems and asking if David might have time for a phone conversation. His reply came within minutes. Absolutely. Sophie and I were planning to visit Mom this evening. Would you like to join us for dinner? Sometimes it helps to talk through problems with people who care about the outcome. The invitation felt like a lifeline, an opportunity to spend time with people who valued her for her character rather than viewing her as a source of money or a target for intimidation. I think I'd like that, Maria told Elena. Catherine's family feels safe and normal in a way that my own life doesn't right now. Good. You need to be around people who remind you of your worth instead of people who threaten your security. As her shift ended, Maria followed the new safety protocols Amanda had established, waiting for security to escort her to the covered parking garage and checking her surroundings carefully before approaching her car. The additional precautions felt strange and unnecessary, but she understood that her previous sense of safety had been based on ignorance of the threats that already existed. Driving to Catherine Liu's house, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, she had been a married nurse with financial security and a clear sense of her future. Now she was a separated woman with massive debt, criminal threats, and an uncertain path forward. But she was also someone who had discovered her own strength and the value of genuine relationships. Catherine's family had recognized her worth and chosen to support her. Elena continued to provide unwavering friendship, and Detective Chen was working to ensure her safety. Jake's betrayal had destroyed many things, but it had also revealed which relationships were built on mutual respect versus selfish need. As Maria pulled into Catherine's driveway, she felt grateful for the people who had chosen to stand with her, rather than those who had chosen to exploit her trust. Jake sat in Tony's office, sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning that made the small space feel like a refrigerator. The strip mall location was exactly what Maria would have expected, wedged between a check cashing service and a discount cell phone store, with tinted windows that prevented anyone from seeing inside. The interior was sparse but clean, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet that probably contained records of other people's financial desperation. Tony Ricci was not what Jake had imagined when they first spoke by phone. Rather than the stereotypical intimidating figure from movies, Tony appeared to be an ordinary businessman in his 50s, wearing a polo shirt and khakis that could have belonged to any suburban father. His calm demeanor was somehow more unsettling than obvious aggression would have been. "Jake, I appreciate you coming in to discuss our situation," Tony said, gesturing for Jake to sit in the chair across from his desk. "I think there's been some confusion about the terms of our agreement." "There's no confusion. I know I owe you money. I just don't have it right now." "The confusion isn't about the amount. It's about the timeline and your apparent belief that you have options in this matter." Tony opened a file folder containing documents that Jake recognized as copies of his loan agreement, along with photographs that made his blood run cold. Pictures of Maria entering and leaving the hospital, Elena walking with her in the parking lot, the exterior of Catherine Liu's house where Maria had visited the previous evening. "You've been watching my wife constantly. I've been protecting my investment. When someone borrows money from me, I need to understand their resources and relationships. Your wife appears to be well regarded at her workplace and has developed some interesting friendships." The casual way Tony discussed surveillance of Maria felt like a violation more intimate than any financial theft. Jake realized that his gambling addiction had not only destroyed his marriage, but had also stripped Maria of her privacy and security. "She doesn't have anything to do with my debt." "Jake, that's not how family relationships work. Your wife's financial resources, her professional reputation, her personal connections, these are all assets that can be leveraged to resolve our business arrangement. I won't let you involve her." Tony's expression didn't change, but something in his tone became harder. "You won't let me? Jake, you seem to misunderstand your position in this conversation. You borrowed money you couldn't repay, and now you're refusing to utilize available resources to resolve the debt. She doesn't have any money. I stole everything we had saved." Maria drove through the Phoenix streets toward Tony's office. with Detective Chen beside her and a recording device clipped to her shirt. The plan was simple but dangerous. Maria would wear a wire during a meeting with Tony, gathering evidence of his extortion methods while police waited nearby for any sign of escalation. She had volunteered for this role despite everyone's concerns, understanding that her direct involvement might be the key to stopping Tony's operation permanently. "Remember, your safety is more important than the recording," Detective Chen said as they approached the strip mall. "If the situation feels dangerous at any point, use the safe word and we'll intervene immediately." Maria nodded, her hands steady on the steering wheel despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She had faced life and death situations in the hospital, but this felt different because the danger was personal and deliberate rather than medical and random. 3 days earlier, Jake had finally agreed to cooperate with the police investigation after spending a night in jail for his own protection. Tony's escalating threats had convinced him that his only chance of survival was helping law enforcement build a case against the loan operation. Jake's testimony had provided crucial details about Tony's business methods, but prosecutors needed recorded evidence of actual threats to pursue serious charges. The strip mall looked exactly as Jake had described it, a collection of marginal businesses catering to people with limited options and immediate needs. Tony's office sat between enterprises that thrived on financial desperation, creating an ecosystem where predatory lending could operate with minimal scrutiny. Maria parked directly in front of Tony's office, positioning her car so that the surveillance team could observe the entrance clearly. She checked the recording device one final time, then walked toward the door with the same determination she brought to difficult medical procedures. The interior was smaller than she had expected, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. Tony Ricci stood behind the desk, wearing a business casual outfit that made him look like any suburban professional. His appearance was deliberately unremarkable, designed to put potential clients at ease while concealing the predatory nature of his business. "Mrs. Santos, thank you for coming. I believe we can resolve this situation quickly and amicably. Mr. Ricci, I came because your threats against me need to stop. I had nothing to do with my husband's borrowing, and I won't be used as leverage for collecting his debts." Tony gestured for her to sit, his demeanor remaining calm and professional. "Please call me Tony, and I think you misunderstand the nature of our conversation. I'm not here to threaten anyone. You've been photographing me at work and following my daily routine. That feels like threatening behavior. I prefer to think of it as information gathering. When someone owes me money, I need to understand their full financial picture, including family resources and potential income sources." The casual way Tony discussed surveillance made Maria's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure while ensuring her recorder captured every word. "My husband's debts are his responsibility. I'm not obligated to pay money I didn't borrow." "Legally, you're correct. But practically, families often choose to help each other avoid unpleasant consequences. Your husband borrowed $15,000, and that debt doesn't disappear simply because he lacks the means to repay it. So, what kind of unpleasant consequences are you suggesting?" Tony opened his filing cabinet and withdrew a folder containing more photographs than Maria had expected. Pictures of her car in various parking lots, images of her apartment building, shots of Elena and other hospital staff members she associated with regularly. "I'm suggesting that unpaid debts create complications that extend beyond the original borrower. Your husband's gambling problem has created obligations that affect everyone in his social network." Maria felt sick seeing the scope of Tony's surveillance operation, but she forced herself to continue the conversation while the recording device documented his threats. "Are you saying you would harm me or my friends to collect money from my husband?" "I'm saying that people who borrow money from Me understand that their entire family becomes invested in successful repayment. It's a powerful motivator for finding creative solutions to financial problems. That sounds like extortion. Tony's expression hardened slightly, the first crack in his professional facade. Mrs. Santos, I run a legitimate lending business. I provide capital to people who can't access traditional financing, and I expect reasonable cooperation when payments become overdue. Reasonable cooperation doesn't include threatening innocent people. Your husband signed documents acknowledging that his family members might be contacted regarding collection efforts. You're not innocent. You're part of his support system, and therefore part of the solution to his debt. Maria realized that Tony had probably used similar language with dozens of other families, refining his approach to maximize psychological pressure while maintaining plausible deniability about direct threats. I want to see those documents. Tony produced a contract with Jake's signature, containing language that was technically legal but morally reprehensible. Buried in the fine print were clauses about family consultation and comprehensive collection, methods that gave Tony broad latitude for intimidation tactics. As you can see, your husband consented to family involvement in debt resolution. I'm simply exercising the rights he granted me. This contract is unconscionable. No legitimate lender would include provisions for harassing family members. Mrs. Santos, I think you're missing the point of this conversation. Your husband owes money he can't repay, and his debt isn't going to disappear through moral arguments about lending practices. Tony leaned forward, his voice becoming more direct. I need $15,000 within the next 48 hours, or I'll have to explore alternative collection methods. What kind of alternative methods? The kind that make people understand how serious I am about being repaid. The threat was finally explicit enough to constitute clear evidence of extortion. Maria felt a mixture of fear and satisfaction, knowing that Tony had just provided prosecutors with everything they needed, while also revealing the genuine danger she faced. I don't have $15,000. My husband stole our savings and destroyed our financial security. Then you'll need to find it. Perhaps your new friends from the hospital could provide assistance. I understand you've developed some promising relationships with grateful patients. The reference to Catherine's family made Maria realize that Tony had been monitoring her interactions far more closely than she had imagined. He knew about the Liu family's support and was suggesting that she exploit their gratitude for financial purposes. I won't involve other people in cleaning up my husband's mistakes. Mrs. Santos, let me be very clear about your situation. Your husband's debt exists regardless of your moral objections to my collection methods. You can either help resolve it voluntarily, or you can experience the consequences of his irresponsibility. What consequences? Tony opened another folder containing documents that made Maria's heart stop. Credit reports, employment records, detailed financial information about Catherine Liu's family, and what appeared to be surveillance photos of Sophie Liu at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Consequences that extend to anyone you care about. Your friend Eleanor, for example, who has been so supportive during your recent difficulties. Or Dr. Sophie Liu, who works in pediatric medicine and might find her professional reputation affected by association with someone involved in criminal financial activities. Dean, the threat against Sophie was particularly chilling because it demonstrated Tony's willingness to target innocent people with respected careers, potentially destroying their lives to collect a gambling debt they had no connection to. You would threaten a pediatric doctor. I would remind you that your choices affect everyone around you, just as your husband's choices affected you. Maria realized that Tony's operation depended on expanding circles of intimidation. using family and social connections to create pressure that isolated borrowers couldn't resist. The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as it was ruthless. "I need time to consider my options. You have 48 hours. After that, the people you care about will start experiencing complications in their personal and professional lives." Maria stood to leave, her legs unsteady, but her resolve firm. She had obtained the evidence needed to prosecute Tony while also understanding the full scope of the threat against everyone she cared about. "Mrs. Santos, I hope you'll make the wise choice. Your husband's debt is a solvable problem if you're willing to be practical about solutions." As Maria left Tony's office, she could feel his eyes watching her through the tinted windows. The recording device had captured everything prosecutors needed, but she knew that Tony's threats were genuine and immediate. 48 hours to find $15,000 or watch everyone she loved become targets for a predator who had refined psychological terrorism into a business model. Detective Chen was waiting in an unmarked car 3 blocks away, monitoring Maria's location through GPS, while backup units maintained positions around the strip mall. When Maria reached the predetermined meeting point, Chen immediately assessed her condition while securing the recording device. "Are you hurt?" "Physically fine, but he threatened Eleanor and Sophie Liu by name. He has detailed files on everyone. I associate with and surveillance photos of Sophie at her hospital." The recording captured everything? Every threat, every admission about surveillance, every detail about his collection methods? Detective Chen listened to portions of the recording through headphones, her expression growing more serious as Tony's threats became explicit. "This is excellent evidence. We have him on extortion, stalking, and criminal conspiracy. The district attorney can file charges immediately. What about the 48-hour deadline? He's going to target innocent people if you don't arrest him before then." "We're moving tonight. Tony's office, his home, and the homes of his known associates. This recording gives us probable cause for comprehensive search warrants." Maria felt relieved that law enforcement was taking immediate action, but she understood that Tony's arrest might not eliminate all the dangers he had created. Organizations like his often included multiple people capable of carrying out threats even after leadership was removed. What about protection for Elena and the Liu family? "We'll notify them about potential threats and provide patrol coverage. For their homes and workplaces, Tony's organization appears to be small, so eliminating him should eliminate most of the danger." As they drove back toward the hospital, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed since discovering Jake's betrayal 2 weeks earlier. She had gone from being a trusting wife focused on patient care to being someone who wore recording devices to gather evidence against criminals who threatened her friends. But she had also discovered strength and support she hadn't known existed. Elena's unwavering friendship, the Liu family's genuine concern for her well-being, Detective Chen's professional competence, and her own ability to face danger when protecting people she cared about. "Detective, what happens to Jake after you arrest Tony?" "Your husband will need to testify at trial, but his cooperation with our investigation should result in reduced charges for his role in the loan arrangement." "And the debt?" "Criminal. Organizations can't collect debts through legal channels. Once we seize Tony's assets, your husband's obligation disappears along with the criminal enterprise." Nadie, the simple statement felt revolutionary to Maria. Jake's gambling addiction had created a crisis that seemed impossible to resolve, but law enforcement action could eliminate the most dangerous consequences while giving them space to address the underlying financial damage. Her phone buzzed with a text message from David Liu. "Maria, Sophie mentioned you seemed stressed during your last conversation. Our family would like to do something more substantial to support you. Could we meet tomorrow to discuss some ideas we've been developing? The timing felt surreal. While she was escaping from threats against the Liu family, David was reaching out with offers of additional support. The contrast between Tony's exploitation and David's generosity highlighted the fundamental difference between people who created value and those who destroyed it. Detective, I think the Liu family wants to help me financially. Is it appropriate for me to accept support from former patients? Does it, the ethical constraints apply to medical care, not personal relationships that develop afterward? If they're offering assistance as friends rather than patients, there shouldn't be any professional conflicts. As they reached the hospital, Maria realized that the crisis created by Jake's betrayal was finally reaching resolution. Tony would be arrested, the threats would end, and she would have an opportunity to rebuild her life with support from people who genuinely cared about her well-being. But the most important change was internal. She had discovered that she could face intimidation and danger without losing her essential character, that she could protect others while protecting herself, and that strength often emerged from situations that initially seemed overwhelming. The woman who walked into Desert Valley Medical Center that evening was fundamentally different from the one who had discovered her stolen savings 2 weeks earlier. She had been tested by betrayal, threatened by criminals, and forced to navigate systems she had never encountered. But she had also been supported by genuine friends, protected by competent professionals, and reminded of her own resilience and worth. Jake's gambling addiction had destroyed their marriage and financial security, but it had also revealed the difference between relationships based on exploitation and those based on mutual respect. As Maria prepared for her evening shift, she felt grateful for the clarity that crisis had provided about what truly mattered in her life. The patients in the COVID ward still needed her skill and compassion. Elena still provided friendship and support. The Liu family still offered genuine care and concern. Detective Chen was still working to ensure her safety. Jake's betrayal had shattered many things, but it had also illuminated the relationships and qualities that were worth preserving and rebuilding. As Maria put on her scrubs and prepared to care for people fighting for their lives, she understood that her own fight was nearly over and that she was winning. Tomorrow would bring Tony's arrest, the end of the threats, and the beginning of a new chapter built on honesty, genuine relationships, and the strength she had discovered within herself. The worst was behind her, and the best was still being written. The coordinated arrests began at dawn, with Detective Chen leading teams to Tony Ricci's office, his home in a middle-class Phoenix suburb, and the locations of 3 associates, who handled different aspects of his lending operation. Maria watched from the hospital break room as local news covered the raids, seeing Tony led away in handcuffs, while FBI agents carried boxes of evidence from his strip mall office. The scale of Tony's operation surprised even Detective Chen. Financial records seized during the searches revealed over 200 active loans totaling more than $3 million, with interest rates that ranged from illegal to astronomical. Many borrowers were struggling with gambling addictions, medical debt, or unemployment, making them vulnerable to predatory terms that traditional lenders would never offer. He had files on entire families, Detective Chen explained to Maria during their meeting that afternoon. Detailed surveillance records, financial information, employment data. Your situation was just one example of how he terrorized people into compliance. Maria felt sick reading the summary of Tony's methods, understanding that dozens of other families had experienced the same threats and intimidation that had turned her life upside down. But she also felt relieved, knowing that the evidence would put Tony in prison for years while dismantling an organization that had thrived on desperation and fear. What happens to all the people who owed him money? Legally, debts to criminal organizations are unenforceable. The FBI is working with financial counselors to help victims understand their rights and develop legitimate payment plans for any valid underlying debts. The news about Jake's debt being legally eliminated felt surreal to Maria. 2 weeks ago, $15,000 had seemed like an impossible burden that threatened everyone she cared about. Now, it simply disappeared along with the criminal enterprise that had created it. Jake was scheduled to testify before a grand jury the following week, his cooperation having earned him immunity from prosecution for his role in Tony's operation. Detective Chen explained that Jake would still need to address his gambling addiction and the credit card debt he had accumulated, but criminal charges had been dropped in exchange for his assistance. Will I need to testify too? The recording you made provides everything prosecutors need to prove extortion and conspiracy charges. Unless Tony's lawyers try to challenge the evidence, your testimony probably won't be necessary. Maria felt grateful that her direct involvement in the case was ending. She had done what was necessary to protect herself and others, but she was ready to focus on rebuilding her life rather than prosecuting criminals. Her phone buzzed with a text from David Liu. Maria, we heard about the arrests on the news. Sophie, and I would like to take you to dinner tonight to celebrate. Are you free around 7? The invitation felt perfect. After 2 weeks of crisis and uncertainty, the idea of celebrating with people who cared about her well-being offered the kind of closure that court proceedings couldn't provide. Elena emerged from the supply closet carrying an armload of medical supplies, her expression bright with excitement about the news coverage. I can't believe how big Tony's operation was. The news said he had been threatening families for over 5 years. Detective Chen showed me some of his files. He had surveillance photos and financial records for hundreds of people. Are you going to see Jake now that the criminal charges are resolved? The question made Maria pause. She hadn't spoken to Jake since the day he revealed the loan shark debt, and she wasn't sure what kind of conversation they could have now that the immediate danger had passed. I don't know. The threats are gone, but that doesn't change what he did to our marriage and our finances. You don't have to decide anything immediately. Give yourself time to process everything that's happened. As her shift ended, Maria drove through Phoenix streets that felt different now that Tony's surveillance had ended. For 2 weeks, she had modified her routes and schedule to avoid predictable patterns, always aware that dangerous people might be watching her movements. The freedom to drive normally, to park where she wanted, to move through her life without looking over her shoulder felt like recovering from a physical illness. Catherine Liu's house was in an established neighborhood where mature trees provided shade, and the houses showed the kind of care that came from long-time residents who took pride in their community. Maria had visited twice since Catherine's discharge, both times finding the peaceful atmosphere a welcome contrast to the chaos in her own life. David answered the door wearing casual clothes and a smile that suggested genuine happiness about seeing her rather than obligation or politeness. Maria, come in. Sophie's been cooking all afternoon, and Mum's been telling stories about her favorite nurse. The interior of the house reflected Catherine's career as an educator, with built-in bookshelves containing decades of teaching materials, alongside family photographs that documented 3 generations of achievement and growth. The atmosphere was warm and welcoming in a way that Maria's own apartment had never achieved, even during the happiest periods of her marriage. Catherine was sitting in the living room reading a gardening magazine, her recovery complete enough to allow normal activities but careful enough to avoid overexertion. She looked up as Maria entered, her expression brightening with genuine affection. Maria, you look much better than the last time I saw you. The stress lines around your eyes are gone. I feel better. The situation that was causing problems has been resolved. Sophie emerged from the kitchen carrying a platter of appetizers, her medical training evident in the way she automatically assessed Maria's appearance and demeanor for signs of ongoing stress or illness. "We heard about the arrests on the news. David said it was connected to your husband's financial problems." Maria had already decided to be honest with the Liu family about what had happened, understanding that they had earned the right to know why their support had been so meaningful during such a difficult period. "My husband developed a gambling addiction and stole our savings to fund his betting. When that wasn't enough, he borrowed money from criminals who started threatening me to pressure him for repayment." The simple statement captured the essential facts without dwelling on the emotional devastation or personal details that weren't relevant to their friendship. Catherine set down her magazine, her expression shifting to the kind of focused concern that had characterized her approach to students who faced difficult circumstances. That must have been terrifying, discovering betrayal by someone you trusted, then facing threats from strangers. It was, but it also helped me understand who my real friends are and what kind of strength I have when I need it. David nodded approvingly. Crisis reveals character, both in the people causing problems and the people solving them. They moved to the dining room, where Sophie had prepared a meal that reflected both her medical understanding of nutrition and her cultural heritage. The conversation flowed easily between topics, touching on Catherine's continued recovery, Sophie's work at the Children's Hospital, David's restaurant management during the pandemic, and Maria's thoughts about her future plans. "Have you decided what you want to do about your marriage?" Catherine asked gently, her teacher's instinct recognizing that Maria needed to articulate her thoughts rather than just think about them privately. "I think it's over. Trust is fundamental to partnership, and Jake destroyed that completely. Not just with the gambling, but with months of lying while I was working extra shifts to support us. That's a difficult decision, but it sounds like you've thought it through carefully. The hardest part is accepting that I was so wrong about someone I lived with for 3 years. I thought I knew him, but the person who stole our savings and borrowed money from criminals isn't anyone I recognize." Sophie leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Addiction changes people in ways that can be shocking to the people who love them. It doesn't excuse his choices, but it might explain why he became someone you didn't recognize." "Maybe, but even if addiction explains his behavior, it doesn't mean I have to accept the consequences or rebuild something that's been so thoroughly broken." David had been listening quietly, his business experience giving him perspective on partnerships that failed due to fundamental character differences. Sometimes, the best decision is to cut losses and start fresh, rather than trying to repair something that was built on false foundations. The conversation continued for another hour, covering practical questions about Maria's living situation, her financial recovery, and her professional goals now that the immediate crisis had passed. The Liu family's interest felt genuine rather than intrusive, focused on understanding how they could provide meaningful support rather than satisfying curiosity about personal details. As the evening wound down, David walked Maria to her car, while Sophie and Catherine cleaned up inside. "Maria, my family has been discussing something, and we'd like to propose an idea for your consideration." "What kind of idea?" "We want to establish a fund to support healthcare workers who face personal financial crises. What happened to you, having your security destroyed by someone else's addiction, that's not unique. Other nurses and doctors are probably facing similar situations." The proposal surprised Maria, both because of its scope and because it suggested the Liu family had been thinking about her situation in broader social terms rather than just as an individual crisis. "That's very generous, but it's also a significant undertaking. We have the resources and, more importantly, we have the motivation." Your care during Mom's hospitalization showed us how much healthcare workers sacrifice for others. We want to create something that supports people who dedicate their lives to helping others. What would my role be? We'd like you to help design the program and oversee its implementation. Your experience with financial crisis, your understanding of healthcare worker needs, your connections at the hospital, those would be invaluable for creating something that actually helps people. Maria felt overwhelmed by the scope of what David was suggesting, but also excited by the possibility of creating meaningful change from the chaos that Jake's addiction had created. I'd need to think about it carefully. Make sure there weren't conflicts of interest with my nursing position. Of course, take whatever time you need. The important thing is that you know you have options and support as you rebuild your life. As Maria drove home, she reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed since discovering Jake's betrayal 3 weeks earlier. The immediate crises had been resolved. Tony was in jail, the threats had ended, the criminal debt had been eliminated. But more importantly, she had discovered resources and relationships that provided foundation for building something better than what had been destroyed. Jake's addiction had cost them their marriage, their savings, and their shared future. But it had also introduced her to people like the Liu family, who understood that healing required not just addressing immediate problems, but creating systems that prevented similar crises for others. The woman who had been devastated by discovering stolen savings was becoming someone who could use that experience to help other healthcare workers facing similar betrayals. The crisis that had threatened to destroy her life was transforming into an opportunity to create meaningful change in other people's lives. As Maria pulled into her apartment complex, she realized that the most difficult chapter of her story was ending, and the most meaningful chapter was about to begin. Jake's choices had created the crisis, but her choices would determine what emerged from it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.